If you can solve this, I'll give you my job. The sentence landed in the glass-walled boardroom like a match dropped into gasoline, and for one clean second, nobody breathed. William Hargrove stood at the head of the 40-foot conference table, one hand resting beside a silver laptop, the other pointing at the woman in the navy cleaning uniform near the door. Naomi Carter had been wiping coffee from the edge of the credenza when she made the mistake of looking too long at the whiteboard. Behind William, the board was crowded with numbers, arrows, delivery routes, warehouse codes, and a red circle around the figure that had been haunting Hargrove Systems for 3 weeks. $40 million in projected losses by the end of the quarter. 12 executives sat frozen under the bright ceiling lights, their suits dark and sharp, their faces pale from too much coffee and too little sleep. Outside the windows, Chicago glittered 52 floors below, cold and distant, the kind of city that looked beautiful when you were rich enough to stand above it. Naomi stood beside her cleaning cart with a microfiber cloth folded in one hand and a plastic spray bottle in the other. The faint scent of lemon disinfectant clung to her sleeves. She had not meant to speak. She had not meant to become visible. But when Derek Sloan, the head of analytics, tapped the board and said the warehouse workers would have to be cut to stabilize the system, something in her chest tightened. 600 jobs reduced to a line item. 600 families punished because a room full of powerful people had mistaken the symptom for the cause. So she had said it quietly, almost under her breath, but the room had been silent enough to hear. That equation won't save the company. It's the reason you're losing money. William had turned slowly, as if the furniture had spoken. His eyes moved over her face, then down to the name stitched above her pocket. Naomi. Not Miss Carter. Not ma'am. Just Naomi, small white letters on cheap fabric. A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone gave a soft laugh. Derek leaned back with the tired amusement of a man watching a child reach for a steering wheel. Excuse me, William said, his voice smooth enough to cut without sounding sharp. Naomi felt the heat rise along her neck, but she kept her shoulders level. The delay isn't coming from warehouse capacity, she said. It's coming from the transfer sequence. You're optimizing the wrong constraint. For half a second, Claire Bennett, the CFO, looked up from her tablet. Her expression changed, not belief, not yet, but attention. William noticed. His smile tightened. He reached for a black marker, rolled it between his fingers and let it drop. It bounced once on the polished floor and came to rest near Naomi's shoes. Then please, he said, spreading his arms toward the board while the executives watched. Educate us. A ripple of laughter moved around the table, low and careful at first, then braver when William did not stop it. Naomi looked down at the marker. Her reflection stared back from the glossy floor, bent and blurred beneath the light. A black woman in a cleaner's uniform. A cart behind her. A room in front of her that had already decided what she was worth. William stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal while still letting everyone hear. If you can solve this, I'll give you my job. The laughter came louder this time. Derek covered his mouth with 2 fingers, pretending to cough. Someone near the far end whispered, "This should be good." Naomi did not answer. She crouched, picked up the marker and stood. The plastic felt cold in her hand. Across the table, William's smile remained fixed, confident, almost bored. He thought he had placed her inside a joke so perfectly that there was no way out except embarrassment. He did not know that the woman he was mocking had once written equations on library windows at 2 in the morning because she could not afford a private study room. He did not know that the transfer model on his board carried the bones of a theory she had built years ago, before grief and medical bills and rejection letters pushed her out of every room that had promised to open. He only saw the uniform. He only saw the cart. He only saw a woman he believed had forgotten her place. Naomi stepped toward the whiteboard. Her shoes made a soft sound against the marble. The room quieted, not out of respect but curiosity, the cruel kind that waits for someone to fail. She uncapped the marker. The small click seemed louder than it should have been. Then she lifted her hand and began to write. Naomi's first line on the board was not an answer. It was a correction. She drew a clean horizontal stroke beneath Derek Sloan's final equation, then crossed out the warehouse capacity variable without hesitation. A few executives leaned back, almost offended by the confidence in her hand. Derek gave a small laugh through his nose, but it came too late, too thin. Naomi could feel every pair of eyes pressing against her back. The boardroom smelled like leather chairs, hot coffee, and expensive cologne, but beneath it all she could still smell the lemon cleaner on her own sleeves. A sharp reminder of the life everyone in that room believed explained her completely. She wrote slowly at first, not because she was unsure, but because the room needed to see every step. Transfer interval. Route compression. Dock overlap. Human delay tolerance. She circled the last phrase twice. Human delay tolerance. That was the part Derek had erased from the model. That was the part men in offices liked to remove because people were harder to control than numbers. Naomi had learned that years ago in a campus library outside Boston, sitting beside a vending machine at 3 in the morning, her laptop balanced on a backpack with a broken zipper. Back then, she had worn a university sweatshirt instead of a cleaning uniform. Back then, professors had called her brilliant without sounding surprised. Her research had been about motion through pressure, how delivery networks failed not at their largest points, but at the human seams between them, shift changes, tired hands, crowded loading doors, drivers waiting 12 minutes too long in the wrong lane. She had loved that work because it treated people as part of the system, not as waste to be cut away. Then her father got sick. The hospital bills came in white envelopes with blue windows, one after another, each one colder than the last. Her mother took double shifts at a diner in Bronzeville. Her younger brother Marcus was still in high school, trying to pretend he did not hear the grown-up conversations through the apartment walls. Naomi came home for what was supposed to be one semester. One semester became a year. The fellowship disappeared. The phone calls stopped coming. By the time she tried to return, her old advisor had moved on, her research files had been archived, and every company that claimed to love innovation seemed unable to see past the gap in her resume. So Naomi learned the city from the service elevators. She learned which office floors stayed bright past midnight, which executives left half-eaten dinners beside million-dollar forecasts, which conference rooms held decisions that would ripple all the way down to people who never got invited upstairs. Hargrove Systems hired her through a cleaning contractor 14 months earlier. The badge they gave her opened supply closets, restrooms, and back corridors, but never the main doors. Still, Naomi listened. Not to gossip. To patterns. A company spoke even when it thought the staff could not understand the language. She heard shipping numbers in late-night calls. She saw printed charts left beside trash cans. She noticed when warehouse complaints turned into spreadsheet shortcuts. She watched Derek Sloan become famous inside the building for a model that felt strangely familiar, like hearing an old melody played badly in another room. Now, standing in front of that same model, she understood why it had been hurting people. It had been stripped of its conscience. She added a bracket around 3 transfer points and wrote a new sequence beside them. Claire Bennett's tablet lowered inch by inch until it rested flat against the table. William Hargrove was no longer smiling. Naomi could sense him behind her, still as a locked door. She did not look back. Looking back would make this about his permission. She kept writing, and with each number the room grew quieter. The laughter had gone first. Then the whispers. Then the small restless sounds of powerful people waiting for someone else to tell them what to think. Naomi underlined the final constraint and placed the marker tip against the board one more time. The black ink shone wet under the ceiling lights. For the first time since she had entered the room, nobody saw the cleaning cart behind her. They saw the math. William Hargrove had built his entire career on the belief that control was the same thing as intelligence. He liked straight lines, closed doors, and people who answered before he finished asking. In every interview, he spoke about discipline as if it were a religion. In every photograph, he stood with his chin slightly raised, blue eyes fixed beyond the camera, silver hair combed back with the neatness of a man who had never been asked to wait outside a room. Hargrove Systems was his empire, and the 52nd floor was its throne room. The walls were glass, the table was imported walnut, and the city below looked less like a place where people lived and more like a map he owned. He had started with inherited money, sharpened it with ambition, and polished the story until it sounded like self-made greatness. Employees learned quickly that William rewarded confidence, not questions. He liked numbers when they obeyed him. He liked people when they reflected him. Derek Sloan understood that better than anyone. Derek was tall, polished, and quick with phrases like predictive efficiency and structural discipline, the kind of language that made uncertainty sound expensive and layoffs sound brave. For months, William had allowed Derek to stand beside him in meetings, pointing at charts, promising that the company's delivery crisis could be solved if only they removed the weakest links. Those links, according to Derek, were warehouse workers in Joliet, truck coordinators in Gary, night dispatchers on the south side, and anyone whose labor could be described from a distance instead of understood up close. William had believed him because Derek looked like the kind of man William trusted. Clean cuff links, Ivy League vowels, a watch that cost more than Naomi's car. Naomi, by contrast, had entered that same room through the side door with a trash liner tucked under one arm. To William, she belonged to the category of people who made the building function without becoming part of the building's memory. He had seen hundreds like her over the years, women pushing carts before sunrise, men replacing bulbs after midnight, security guards nodding from behind desks. They were present and invisible, necessary and nameless. That invisibility had always made his life easier. But now Naomi's handwriting filled the board where Derek's confidence had been. William watched the pattern emerge, and something cold pressed behind his ribs. The lines were not random. They were elegant. Worse, they were practical. Naomi had not dressed up a guess in complicated words. She had exposed a simple failure hidden beneath expensive analysis. Claire Bennett noticed it too. She leaned forward, one elbow on the table, her eyes moving from Naomi's bracketed transfer points to the live dashboard glowing on the wall. Claire was not sentimental. She had survived 20 years in corporate finance by doubting every miracle and checking every decimal. Yet her face had changed. The careful blankness she wore in meetings had cracked into concentration. "Run that sequence against last Thursday's Midwest load," she said quietly. Derek turned his head sharply. "That is not necessary." Claire did not look at him. "Run it." A junior analyst near the screen swallowed and began typing. The soft clicking of keys filled the silence. William kept his gaze on Naomi, waiting for her to look nervous, waiting for the moment the room would return to its proper shape. But Naomi simply stepped aside so they could see the board more clearly. She held the marker at her side. Her breathing was steady. There was no performance in her face, no hunger to embarrass him, no desperate need to be praised. That unsettled him more than anger would have. The dashboard flickered. Numbers rearranged themselves in pale blue columns. Delivery time dropped. Idle dock hours dropped. Overtime waste dropped. The projected quarterly loss fell so quickly that the room seemed to tilt around it. Someone whispered, "That cannot be right." Naomi looked at the screen, then back at the equation. "It is not perfect," she said. "You still have a bottleneck in Indianapolis because the model assumes a 30-minute turnover, and they have not hit that since February." The junior analyst checked another tab. His face drained. "She is right," he said, barely above a whisper. Derek's jaw tightened. Claire slowly turned toward William, but William did not move. He could feel the weight of the joke he had made only minutes earlier settling over the room like dust. He had invited a woman he dismissed to fail in public, and instead she had made the most expensive people in the building look unfinished. For the first time that morning, the boardroom did not feel like his throne room. It felt like a witness stand. Naomi should have stopped after the dashboard proved her right. A safer person would have stepped back, handed the marker to someone with a title, and let the room pretend it had discovered the truth on its own. That was how people survived in places like Hargrove Systems. They gave powerful people enough light to see but not enough to feel exposed. Naomi knew that rule. She had lived by it for years. But then the junior analyst enlarged the Midwest load report, and Naomi saw the second problem hiding beneath the first. It was not just a bad sequence. It was a deliberate simplification, the kind made by someone who understood the original model well enough to steal its shape, but not well enough to respect its purpose. Her eyes moved to the lower corner of Derek's slide deck, where a small internal label read Sloan Adaptive Flow version 4.2. Something in her stomach went still. She had seen that phrase before, or almost seen it. Carter Flow. That had been the name she gave her draft in graduate school, not because she thought it would make her famous, but because her father had laughed when she showed him the first diagram and said, "Baby, one day they will put your name on something bigger than a bill." She remembered him sitting at their kitchen table in Chicago, his work boots dusty from a 12-hour shift, pretending to understand every symbol because he understood her. Now her name was gone, and Derek's was sitting where it should have been. Naomi lifted the marker again. "There is another issue," she said. Derek stood so quickly his chair rolled back against the carpet. "No, there is not. We have entertained this long enough." William's head turned toward him, irritated by the panic in his voice. Naomi did not raise her volume. The model was never designed to remove labor from the system. It was designed to protect the system from collapsing when labor is pushed past capacity. "You are guessing," Derek said. "No," Naomi replied. "I am remembering." The word changed the air. Claire Bennett's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion toward Naomi, but toward the slide deck. William noticed the shift and disliked it. Control was slipping from him in small, humiliating increments. "Miss Carter," he said, using her last name for the first time, though it came out stiff and unnatural. "Explain exactly what you mean." Naomi turned to face the room. Behind her, the board was covered in her writing, dark lines shining under the fluorescent lights. This framework came from a human delay model developed for urban delivery networks. It accounts for fatigue, dot congestion, driver handoff, and shift overlap. Whoever adapted it for your company removed the human safeguards and kept the efficiency targets. That is why it looks profitable on paper and fails in the real world. A board member near the window folded his arms. And how would a cleaning contractor know the origin of a proprietary analytics model? The question was polite enough for the room, but the contempt beneath it was not hidden. Naomi felt it land. She had heard versions of it all her life. How would someone like you know this street, this school, this office, this equation, this language, this room? For a moment she saw herself from the outside. A black woman in rubber-soled shoes standing before people who could ruin a department with a sentence and call it strategy. Then she saw the faces of the warehouse workers in the reports, not faces exactly, but names attached to shift codes. People who would never know that their jobs were being debated beside sparkling water and untouched pastries. She turned back to the board and wrote 3 letters in the corner. LC. Her initials. The marker made a soft squeak. "Because I built the original draft," she said. The boardroom did not explode. It tightened. Derek looked toward William, then away. Claire slowly reached for her laptop. William stared at the initials as if they had appeared in a language he should have known but had refused to learn. Naomi placed the marker on the tray. Her hand was steady, but her heart was not. "You can remove my name from a file," she said. "But you cannot make the work forget who wrote it." Derek Sloan's face changed before his words did. The confidence drained first, then the color, then the practice smile he used in meetings when someone beneath him asked a question he did not respect. He reached for the remote on the table and clicked back to the title slide, as if hiding the model would make Naomi's initials disappear from everyone's memory. "This is absurd," he said, but the sentence came out too fast. "We are taking technical advice from a night cleaner now?" The word cleaner hung in the air longer than it should have. It was not the job that made the room uncomfortable. It was the way he used it like a wall. Naomi stood beside the whiteboard, her hands relaxed at her sides, the marker stained dark on her fingertips. She had expected disbelief. She had expected laughter. She had not expected the old ache that rose in her chest when Derek looked at her, as if the uniform had erased every year she had survived before wearing it. William Hargrove did not defend her. Not yet. He looked from Derek to Naomi, calculating which humiliation would cost him less. Claire Bennett opened a search window on her laptop and began typing with sharp, quiet precision. Derek saw her and stepped forward. "Claire, do not waste company time chasing a story." "Then you should not be worried about what I find," Claire replied. Her voice was calm, but the room heard the blade in it. A few executives shifted in their chairs. The junior analyst kept his eyes on the floor. William's hand rested against the back of his chair, knuckles pale. He wanted order restored. He wanted the room to become familiar again, with Derek explaining, Claire measuring, the board listening, and Naomi gone. But the board no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth written in black marker. Naomi looked at the slide deck still glowing on the screen. Version 4.2 fails because it assumes workers can absorb schedule compression without consequence. That was never in my draft. Derek laughed once, dry and dismissive. Your draft? Do you have a patent? A contract? Anything other than a story? The question struck harder because part of it was fair. Naomi had no patent. No attorney. No framed certificate hanging on an office wall. She had an old laptop with a cracked corner. A folder of research files backed up on a cloud account she had not opened in months, and the memory of sending a draft to an academic conference before life pulled her under. People like Derek knew how to take from the unprotected. They knew a stolen idea looked cleaner once it was placed inside a beautiful presentation. I have enough, Naomi said. Derek turned toward William. Sir, this is a distraction. We have layoffs to approve before noon, and we are letting a contractor derail a board decision with emotional claims. At the word layoffs, Naomi's eyes moved to the report on the table. 600 names hidden behind categories. Dock support, night routing, shift coordination, temporary logistics. Temporary, as if a paycheck could be temporary when rent was due every month. She stepped closer to the table, but stopped at the invisible line everyone seemed to believe she should not cross. Those people are not the error, she said. They are the only reason the system has not already failed. Derek's expression hardened. You are out of line. No, Naomi said softly. I am finally in the right one. The room went still. Even William looked up. For the first time, Naomi's voice carried not anger but exhaustion, the kind earned by years of being corrected by people who had never done the work, measured by people who had never carried the weight, and ignored by people who needed her silence to feel intelligent. Claire turned her laptop toward William. On the screen was an archived abstract from a graduate research symposium dated 6 years earlier. The title was different, but the diagram beneath it was unmistakable. At the bottom, in plain black letters, was the name Naomi L. Carter. William stared at it. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Naomi felt the sting behind her eyes, but she did not let a tear fall. She had not come there to beg for pity. She had come because 600 people were about to pay for a lie. William slowly looked at Derek. Explain, he said. Derek swallowed. There are similarities, he began. Claire cut in without raising her voice. There is also matching structure, matching terminology, and a removed attribution trail. The junior analyst whispered. The base code folder is named C-Flow. No one moved. C-Flow. Carter Flow. The name her father had once smiled at across a kitchen table. Naomi looked down at her hands, at the cleaner's roughness along her skin, at the ink still marking her fingers. Then she looked back at William Hargrove. You asked me to solve it, she said. Now you have to decide whether you wanted the answer, or just the joke. For several seconds, William Hargrove did not speak. The silence stretched across the boardroom, thin and bright, catching on every glass wall, every polished chair, every untouched cup of coffee gone cold beside an expensive notebook. Outside, Chicago moved beneath them in tiny streams of traffic, yellow cabs and dark sedans sliding between towers as if nothing important had happened 52 floors above the street. But inside the room, everything had slowed. Naomi could hear the ceiling vents breathing. She could hear the faint buzz of the screen where her name still glowed from Claire Bennett's laptop. Naomi L. Carter. 6 years old, archived, almost forgotten but not gone. The letters felt strange to see in that room, like hearing her father's voice in a place he would never have been allowed to enter except through a maintenance badge. She remembered his hands first. Wide palms, cracked from work, always warm when he folded them around a mug of black coffee at the kitchen table. He had not understood the equations, but he had understood what it meant for his daughter to build something nobody could take from her. Except someone had. Not all at once. Not with a dramatic theft in the night. It happened the way dignity was often stolen from people without power, quietly, through omission, through closed doors, through emails not answered, through rooms where the person with the idea was not invited to explain it. Naomi looked at the whiteboard. The marker lines were already drying to a dull black. Human delay tolerance. Transfer sequence. Carter flow. Her breathing felt steady now, but her chest ached with the weight of being seen too late. If this moment touched your heart, Remember how many people walk through life carrying brilliance under uniforms the world refuses to respect. Naomi did not say that out loud. She only stood there, one hand resting near the tray of markers, while the boardroom wrestled with the truth in front of it. Derek Sloan adjusted his cuffs, then stopped when he realized everyone could see his hands trembling. Claire kept her laptop open, her face composed but her eyes hard. The junior analyst stared at the screen as though a hidden door had appeared in the middle of his own career. William's gaze moved from Naomi's name to the board, then to the cleaning cart near the doorway. The cart looked painfully ordinary now. Gray plastic. A stack of folded cloths. A yellow caution sign hanging from the handle. A life reduced to tools, parked at the edge of a room that had needed the woman pushing it more than it knew. William swallowed. The sound was small, but in that silence it seemed almost public. He had spent decades filling rooms with his voice, bending uncertainty into commands, turning discomfort into someone else's problem. Yet he could not command his way through this. He could not make the archive disappear. He could not unhear Naomi's question. He could not pretend the joke had been harmless when the whole room had laughed with him. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, not in surrender, but to gather herself. The marble floor reflected a faint broken image of her shoes. She thought about the service elevator, the basement locker with the bent hinge, the bus ride home after midnight, the way her younger brother Marcus always left the porch light on when he knew she would be late. She thought about 600 workers whose names were hidden inside a report, people who had no idea their morning would be decided by whether a rich man could bear the shame of being corrected by a black maid. Then Naomi looked up. Her voice when it came was quiet enough that everyone had to lean toward it. The solution is not complicated, she said. But it requires admitting the model was changed by someone who did not respect the people inside it. No one interrupted her. Even Derek stayed silent. The room had finally learned the difference between noise and authority. Naomi turned back to the board and tapped the circled phrase with one finger. You cannot build efficiency by pretending exhaustion is invisible. You cannot save a company by cutting the people holding it together. And you cannot fix a lie by making it more expensive. The words did not rise. They settled. William stared at her, and for the first time that morning, she saw something in his expression that was not pride, not anger, not calculation. It was the dull beginning of recognition. The light from the windows moved across the table, touching the silver laptops, the white papers, the glass water bottles, and finally Naomi's ink-stained fingers. Nobody laughed now. Nobody whispered. The silence no longer belonged to humiliation. It belonged to truth. Claire Bennett did not ask for permission again. She turned her laptop toward the wall screen, connected it with a small silver adapter, and let the archive fill the boardroom in cold blue light. The first document appeared with a university seal at the top and Naomi's name beneath it, clear enough for everyone to read. Naomi L. Carter. Graduate Research Draft. Urban Transfer Pressure and Human Delay Tolerance in Delivery Networks. No one moved. The title was different from Derek's polished version, but the structure beneath it was the same. The same branching transfer map. The same 3-point delay bracket. The same warning about labor compression written in language Derek had removed because it made efficiency sound less heroic. Claire clicked again. A second file opened. Then a third. Timestamps from 6 years earlier. Draft notes. Conference submission. Records. A diagram Naomi had drawn with uneven lines and careful labels, now dressed up in Derek's presentation with corporate colors and his initials in the corner. The room seemed to shrink around him. Derek stood beside his chair, no longer the man guiding the company through crisis, but a man watching the floor give way under a story he had told too confidently. William stared at the screen with a stillness that felt heavier than anger. "Where did you get this model?" he asked. Derek cleared his throat. The framework came through a consulting archive. It was adapted, refined, and rebuilt internally. Claire's eyes did not leave the screen. The metadata says the base file was imported under your username 11 months ago. The original folder was labeled Carter Flow Research Materials. A faint sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp, not quite a whisper. Naomi felt it brush past her like cold air. Carter Flow. Hearing the name spoken aloud in that boardroom did something strange to her. It did not feel triumphant. It felt like finding a box of family photographs in a stranger's attic. Her father had been gone 4 years, yet for a moment she could see him leaning over their kitchen table, smiling at a diagram he could not read, proud because she had made it. William turned slowly toward Derek. "Did you know who wrote it?" Derek looked at Naomi, then away. That was answer enough. The junior analyst, pale and shaken, opened another internal window without being asked. "There is more," he said. His voice cracked slightly. The safeguards were commented out in the code. Not deleted. Commented out. He highlighted the lines. Naomi recognized the language immediately. Worker fatigue threshold. Manual override for dock overload. Shift overlap protection. Emergency redistribution when human delay tolerance exceeded safe limits. All the pieces designed to keep the system from crushing the people inside it had been silenced with 2 slashes at the start of each line. Claire leaned closer. Those safeguards would have prevented the current losses. The analyst nodded. And the layoffs. The sentence changed everything. The crisis had not been unavoidable. The losses had not been proof that workers were weak links. The company had taken a model built to protect people, stripped away its conscience, and then blamed those same people when the numbers broke. William's hand slipped from the back of his chair. For the first time since Naomi had entered the room, he looked older than his reputation. Naomi watched him absorb it, watched the certainty drain from his posture. She had expected denial. Maybe another polished speech about internal review and procedural complexity. Instead, William looked at the whiteboard, at her handwriting, at the circled phrase human delay tolerance, and something in his face finally gave way. "Cancel the layoff vote," he said. The words were low, but they carried. Derek turned sharply. "William, you cannot make that decision based on a contractor's accusation." William did not look at him. "I am making it based on evidence." Claire closed one window and opened another. "Legal should be notified." William nodded once. "They will be." Then he faced Naomi. The room held its breath again, but this silence was different from the first one. It was not waiting for her to fail. It was waiting for him to understand what he had done. William's mouth opened, then closed. No command came. No joke. No dismissal. Only the rough outline of shame, unfamiliar on a man who had worn power like armor for most of his life. Naomi did not soften for him. She did not need to. The truth had already entered the room and taken a seat at the head of the table. William Hargrove did not apologize right away. The room was too full of evidence for a quick apology to mean anything. He stood behind his chair, both hands resting on the polished wood, looking at the screen where Naomi's old research files sat beside Derek's corporate presentation like 2 versions of the same face, one honest and one altered. For years, William had believed that leadership meant moving faster than doubt. Now doubt had caught up to him and placed a mirror in front of the entire board. Derek tried to speak again, but Claire Bennett closed the laptop halfway with one firm motion, cutting off the glow from the wall screen. "Human resources and legal are already being notified," she said. "Until the review is complete, he should not remain in this meeting." Derek's eyes moved to William, asking for the protection powerful men often gave each other when the room became inconvenient. William looked back at him, and something hard settled into place. "Leave your badge with security," he said. Derek's face tightened. "After everything I have done for this company?" William's voice stayed low. "That is exactly what we are going to examine." No one laughed. No one looked away. Derek gathered his laptop with careful, angry movements and walked toward the door, passing Naomi without meeting her eyes. The door opened, then closed with a soft hydraulic sigh. It was not dramatic. It was almost quiet. But the room felt different after he was gone, as if a machine that had been humming too loudly had finally stopped. William turned to the remaining executives. "The layoffs are canceled," he said. "Effective immediately. Warehouse operations will continue under a revised model, with worker safeguards restored before any new schedule is approved." A few people began typing at once. Claire nodded, already drafting instructions. Naomi remained near the board, unsure whether she was still part of the meeting or only the reason it had changed. Her cleaning cart waited by the door, gray and patient, holding folded cloths, trash bags and a plastic bottle with a broken trigger. It looked like another life calling her back. William saw her glance at it. The look seemed to hurt him more than anything she had said. He stepped away from his chair and approached slowly, stopping several feet from her, not close enough to crowd her, not high enough to tower. For once, he appeared to understand distance as respect. "Miss Carter," he said. The last name sounded different this time, not stiff but careful. "I mocked you in front of this room. I let others laugh because it protected my pride. I saw your uniform before I saw your mind. That was wrong." Naomi held his gaze. Around them, executives froze again, but this time not from amusement. They were watching a man who had built a career on command struggle to speak without hiding. Behind it, William drew a slow breath. "I owe you more than an apology. The company owes you attribution, compensation, and a formal role in correcting what we damaged." Naomi did not answer immediately. Her thoughts moved to her brother Marcus, to the porch light, to her father's smile, to the workers in Joliet and Gary who would never know how close their paychecks had come to disappearing before lunch. She could have asked for anything in that moment and the room knew it. That knowledge passed across the table like weather. But Naomi had never wanted revenge. Revenge was too small for what had been taken. "I do not want your chair," she said quietly. William's eyes lowered, perhaps remembering the joke that had started it all. "I want every worker protected in writing. I want my name restored to my work. I want Derek's version audited before it hurts anyone else. And I want the company to stop treating the people closest to the work as if they are the farthest from intelligence." Claire looked up, and something like respect softened her face. William nodded once. "Done." Naomi did not smile. Not because she was cold, but because the moment was too heavy for celebration. The room had not been healed. A name had been returned. A lie had been interrupted. 600 people had been spared. That was enough for the first breath. William reached for the marker tray and picked up the black marker she had used. For a second Naomi thought he meant to write over her work. Instead, he placed it gently beside her hand. "Will you help us rebuild it correctly?" he asked. Naomi looked at the marker, then at the board where her handwriting still held the room in silence. "Only if the people who carry the system are invited into the room," she said. William nodded again, slower this time. "Then we will start there." 3 months later, the 52nd floor no longer felt like a place built only for people who spoke in polished sentences and arrived through private elevators. The glass walls were the same. The walnut table was the same. Chicago still stretched below in silver morning light, cars moving along the streets like tiny sparks through a living circuit. But something in the room had changed. At the far end of the boardroom, where William Hargrove once stood alone, a new nameplate rested beside an open notebook. Naomi L. Carter, Director of Systems Ethics and Operations. Beneath it, printed in smaller letters on the first page of the revised company model, was the name her father had once said would belong on something bigger than a bill. Carter Flow. Naomi stood outside the door for a moment before entering. She wore a dark blazer now, simple and well-fitted, but she still carried herself with the same quiet steadiness she had carried in the cleaning uniform. The difference was not in the fabric. It was in the way the room made space when she stepped inside. Around the table sat warehouse supervisors from Joliet, night dispatchers from the South Side, route coordinators from Gary, drivers who knew the weight of a delayed load better than any dashboard ever could, and analysts who had finally learned to listen before explaining. Marcus Reed, the security guard who had once nodded to Naomi at midnight when almost no one else noticed her, stood near the doorway with a small smile he tried to hide and failed. Claire Bennett sat to Naomi's right, reviewing the final safeguards in the revised system. William sat farther down the table than he used to. He had chosen that seat himself. No announcement, no speech, just a chair that no longer claimed the center by habit. When Naomi entered, he stood. After a beat, everyone else did too. Naomi paused, not embarrassed, not proud in the loud way people expected pride to look, but moved by the quiet force of it. Respect did not always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrived as silence, as roommate at a table, as a man who once laughed now standing because he understood he should have listened sooner. The first report was placed in front of her. Worker safeguards restored. Layoffs canceled. Back pay issued for overtime errors. Legal attribution corrected. Derek Sloan's model removed from company systems. Naomi read each line carefully, not rushing, not trusting language just because it sounded clean. She had learned that truth needed witnesses and signatures. At the bottom of the page, William had already signed. Claire had signed. The warehouse representatives had signed. Naomi picked up a pen. For a moment, her hand hovered above the paper, and she thought of her father's hands wrapped around that old coffee mug, of her mother folding diner aprons at midnight, of her brother leaving the porch light on, of every person who had ever been mistaken for small because they were seen doing necessary work. Then she signed her name in full. Naomi L. Carter. The ink dried slowly in the morning light. No one spoke. Outside the boardroom, a cleaning cart rolled softly down the hallway, pushed by a woman Naomi did not recognize. Without thinking, Naomi stepped toward the glass door and held it open for her. The woman looked surprised, then smiled. Naomi smiled back. It was small, but it carried everything. William watched from the table, his face quiet with the kind of regret that had finally learned to become action. Naomi returned to her seat and opened the revised model. The first page was not an equation anymore. It was a statement written in plain language. No system is efficient if it survives by making people invisible. Naomi looked at those words for a long moment. Then she lifted her eyes to the room. She did not need to remind them what had happened. The board still remembered. The glass still remembered. The silence still remembered. And in that silence, beneath the bright Chicago sky, justice did not shout. It sat at the table, ink still fresh, finally wearing its own name.